When you got back to Britain, what happened next?
We were sent to be trained to go out to the Far East, which never came off. So we were sent to a training camp because the unit that I was with, Phantom, had been offered the opportunity of doing the communications for the SAS. So we trained in Scotland, and eventually, when the invasion started, we were sent on an operation called Dunhill, which didn't last long because we were overrun by General Patton's army. We came back, and our next operation was to go to eastern France to work in advance of General Patton's Third Army, who was driving across France with the objective of cutting through the Vosges Mountains to the borders of Germany at Strasbourg. And the operation that we were sent to do, which was to drop in advance of General Patton's Third Army and disrupt the German troops who were facing him in order to make it easier for him to get through the Vosges to the borders of Germany. And this operation was called Leuthen. And so we were dropped in France behind the enemy lines in the Vosges Mountains with the objective of training the resistance, arming them and using them with us to disrupt the advance of disrupt the Germans, so that the SAS could help General Patton get through the Vosges Mountains quicker to complete his operation. And so we did, and we operated very successfully there for about 6 weeks, disrupting German convoys, shooting them up, mining the roads, and if we could capture the stuff that was being transported, so much the better. Otherwise we just set it on fire to prevent it going to the troops who were facing General Patton. And by this time the weather was very bad, and we were running short of supplies, food and ammunition. So it was very difficult sometimes impossible to get a drop in to help us with all these tasks that we were supposed to carry out. Well, thankfully we thought, well, General Patton will be here in about 10 days to a fortnight and we would be relieved. However, at that point, General Patton's army stopped at Nancy, which is about 70 kilometres away from where we were. And the explanation was that he had been unable to get supplies and his tanks were bogged down and he needed petrol, so he couldn't go beyond Nancy. Well, from then on, the operation was not possible to continue, because while the Germans were not fighting the Americans who had stopped, they released 2 divisions, one of them armoured, to scour the forest and clear us out. It was causing them so much trouble. So it became unhealthy to be there. They were a large force, they had dogs, so the result was that we kept hopping from one valley to another, and in effect we'd ceased to be effective. So the Colonel Franks, sent a message back saying it was impossible to continue, and he suggested that the operation be wound up. And very quickly came back the message. Yes, they agreed and said, right, pack it in and send the troops back through the German lines to join the American army. Well, Colonel Franks then addressed the whole company and said, I'm going to send you back in groups of 4 and 6, in charge of an officer if possible, if not an NCO, and if not, you'll have to make your own way back in small groups. And he said, I would be staying here with 3 other SAS officers and the sergeant major, and he says, I want 2 phantom signals to remain behind. Well, the commanding officer of the phantom contingent at that time was Captain Hislop, who in peacetime had been an amateur jockey. And he said, well, I'm staying. And at that time I was a corporal. I was the senior, well, the only NCO. So I said, well, yeah, it must be my job. So we both stayed behind to close the operation down. And the men were all sent off in small groups and told where to make for. The trouble was that some patrols were still out and had not returned. So Colonel Franks left a group of SAS there to wait until these people came back and then tell them what had happened and then get out. Unfortunately, it didn't get out that way. They were unfortunately captured. Anyway, we sent the last message to say the operation was now ceased and we were returning as a group, the last group except for a few who had been told to stay behind to wait for these missing men. So 6 of us set off to come through the German lines. And that's a story in itself. Can't be told here. And we eventually worked our way through the secondary troops until we reached the first class troops who were facing the Americans. And we were at that point detected, and we were being chased through the forest, and I don't think we would have made it. I think that was it. There was too many of them, and we couldn't get out fast enough. But fortuitously, at that very moment, the Americans put in an attack, and they preceded it by a bombardment, and they shelled the German positions, and in this forest huge trees were being hit by shells and cut in half and dropped down. Well, that induced the Germans to then abandon us and return to their original positions in case the Americans would put in an attack. So in the confusion, we gradually extricated ourselves and got out of the area as far as possible. And then night fell, and we holed up for the night. And then the next morning, the senior officer, I failed to mention that during the operation of the Germans to catch us, we had been split from a party of 6 into 2 parties of 3. And I had in my party an SAS major and Captain Hislop, who was a Phantom, and another chap who was a sergeant major in the SAS, who was called Chalky White. So we were then 3 of us. And Peter Power, the major, says, "I'm pretty sure we must be now in no man's land." So as soon as dawn broke, we moved down onto the side of a road, and much to our delight, down the road came a file of Americans. Now the difficulty there was, if we suddenly appeared, they might think we were Germans and get us shot. So he said we will walk down the middle of the road, hold our hands in the air and shout to them in English. And so we did. And they were amazed to learn that we'd been back there for 2 months behind the enemy lines. So we were taken and interrogated, and then were taken to another organisation, a Phantom, which was out there at that time. And we were turned over to them, and as far as we were concerned, that was it. But the first thing that happened was we hadn't had a bath for 2 months. We were absolutely stinking. So we were told to strip all our clothes off, and they were burned. And first of all we took showers, but I'll swear that the water that came off me was yellow. Anyway, we were kitted out by the Phantom unit and the Americans, so we had a right peculiar outfits on, which were half English, half American. And from there on, they whistled up a Dakota, which took us back, and eventually we landed at SAS headquarters at Moore Park, near London.
What happened to the people involved in Operation Lewitton?
At the end of the operation, 31 SAS men were missing, and it was not known where they were, what had happened to them. And the SAS sent out a group of men who were called the Secret Hunters, because it was entirely unofficial, to find out what had happened to these 31 SAS men who had been missing at the end of the war. And they did an excellent job. They found out by asking the locals and interrogating the Germans that they had all eventually been captured on the orders of Hitler. He said if any SAS men are caught who have been working with the resistance, they must be shot. And that is what had happened to the 31 men. But everybody was eventually accounted for. Where they had been buried was found. Those responsible were traced and were chased through France and Germany and arrested and taken before the War Crimes Commission, where the principals were found guilty and were mostly sentenced to be hanged, and the lesser men were sent for long prison sentences. And that is what happened to the SAS men. But that was the number of SAS lost as a result of the stoppage at Nancy was a bit more than it usually is, but it was very, very minor compared with what happened to the local population after we had departed. Having failed to trace us in the forest and catch us, the Germans collected all the men and boys, it is said, between the ages of 16 and 65, from the village of Moosey, which is the nearest village to where we'd been operating, and also from all the villages of what was called the Rabadoo Valley. They cleared all the men out, and they were paraded at the Gestapo headquarters, and anyone who would give them information as to where we were, what had happened to us, would be pardoned and left and could go home. Nobody would do it. They would not betray us. So consequently, from the Rabadoo Valley, hundreds of men and boys were taken away to the concentration camps, from which a great number of them did not return. And that is what happened as a result of the Third Army to be stopped at Nancy. The explanation was that they had run out of supplies, which was only half the truth. Nobody believed it, because it eventually transpired, and I found this out by a lot of research since then, that what happened was General Patton was absolutely fuming and angry that he was not allowed to continue his advance. But I've seen an American book on Patton which explained that what had happened was that the Third Army, instead of going east to the Rhine, had turned north. Now, where could they possibly be going north? The only people operating there were General Montgomery. And it seems, from all the evidence I can find, that what happened was General Montgomery had persuaded General Eisenhower to stop the advance to the Rhine and transfer the American Third Army to him, because he was making his way across France as quickly as possible to reach Berlin before the Russians. So here was a political decision taken and a military decision deferred, which not only proved impossible to do because the Russians were certainly in Berlin first, but it was a devastating blow to the people of the Rabadoo Valley. It became known as the Valley of Widows, and numbers that did not return.
Len, could you explain to us about your medals?
Most of my medals are campaign medals, and these on that side are my father's medals, which he never wore because of the way the merchant navy were treated in the Battle of the Atlantic. Hundreds, if not thousands, of seamen returned their medals to the king in protest, because when their ships were sunk, they were considered to be discharged at sea and their wages stopped. So that's why I'm proud to wear them. He never did. I had to get a special set. It cost me 80 quid to replace his medals. As far as my medals are concerned, you said to me about my medal. Well, with all due respect, dear, you never ask a soldier why he got a decoration, because you will get the stock answer, and I'll give it to you now. I just did what I had been trained to do. And the rest of the medals are campaign medals. Now, at the end of the war, there had been a certain number of campaigns fought, and my dad and I, between us, have every campaign medal of the Second World War available to soldiers and sailors at the end of the war.
What happened at the end of the war?
You were thinking,
Yeah.
and then you could say, you know,
Well, as it happened, when we had been serving in Germany, in place of going to the Far East, we were sent there to support the Control Commission for Germany, which was ruling the country at that time, to be used if necessary. And it wasn't. There was nothing that we had to do, so we were just sculling about. But while there, I went to a party in the sergeant's mess, and a group of Control Commission young ladies were invited to come too. And it was there that I met my eventual wife, Tess. And we met, and then from then on we got winter out together in Germany, and eventually we decided to get married, and that's what happened. When I got back to England, went back to my old job, working with the ships. But in the meantime, my old boss and his sons had been killed in the war, and it had been taken over by another outfit in London. And in law, they were bound to give you your job back. So they couldn't do anything about that. But what they did do was give you your job back, but at the wages that you had been getting before the war started. So that by then was ridiculous, because we had gone out as lads, we had come back as men, and some of us already married. So there was a procedure where you could take the organisation to a tribunal, and I did that. God, hell with this, nothing can be done at this wage that I'm getting now. So I took them to the tribunal, and I had witnesses who worked with me who came and spoke up, and I even had one of the directors speaking for me too. So I won the case, and they were ordered to pay the rates that the people were earning at that time. However, they appealed against this, and the appeal was held in another city. It was held in Manchester. So at that time, I was unable to take all my witnesses there. So I don't know how they came to this decision, but the tribunal there said I wasn't being fairly treated, but they thought in the circumstances that I should be given half the wages of the men who had served through the war. Well, that wasn't any good to me. So I protested and I was given the sack. But, owing to some publicity at the time, I was given the sack, but I was given a year's wages at the new rate in lieu of notice. So that kept us going as a married couple for the first year.
Len, thank you for coming.
It's been a pleasure and honour to speak to you.
Well, thank you for inviting me to a charming young lady. I never thought at my age it would have to be. And I hope you make a success of your lives now. Get stuck in. It's worth it.